Good evening, everyone. Let's start with something a little uncomfortable, shall we? Let's talk about nice. Being nice is something many of us were raised to be. It's in the way we smile when we don't feel like it. It's in the way we avoid conflict to keep the peace. And it's especially in the way we diminish ourselves to avoid making someone else uncomfortable. Many of us were raised to believe that being nice is a virtue. It's something we learn from a young age, whether directly or through subtle cues, that being agreeable and pleasant is the way to navigate the world. But when you really unpack what nice often means, especially for those of us who are socialized to prioritize it, you find something a little less noble hiding underneath. Niceness, in many cases, is not the same as kindness or compassion. It's not rooted in a genuine desire to connect with others or to build meaningful relationships. Instead, it's often born out of fear. It's fear disguised as politeness, and it shapes so much of how we interact with the world. Fear of being judged, fear of conflict, fear of being seen as difficult or too much. These fears can dictate our choices, and before we know it, we're smiling when we don't feel like smiling, saying yes when we want to say no, and apologizing for things that aren't our fault. Fear-driven niceness is insidious because it doesn't feel overtly harmful in the moment. On the surface, it seems harmless. What's wrong with being nice after all? But when you take a closer look, you begin to see how it subtly erodes your sense of self. Every time you choose to be nice over being honest, you send yourself a quiet message that your own feelings, needs, or boundaries don't matter as much as someone else's comfort. Over time, this can create a habit of self-abandonment. You start to lose touch with your own desires and values because you're so busy trying to accommodate everyone else. One of the biggest traps of being overly nice is the false sense of control it gives you. When you're nice, you're often trying to manage how other people perceive you or how they react to you. If you can just be pleasant enough, agreeable enough, or accommodating enough, maybe you can avoid conflict or criticism. Maybe you can keep the peace. But this is an illusion. You can't control how other people think or feel no matter how nice you are. What you can control, however, is your own authenticity. The problem with being nice as a default is that it often becomes a mask. It's a way to hide your true feelings, your true self from the world. And while this might feel safe in the moment, it comes at a cost. It creates a gap between who you are and who you're pretending to be, and that gap can be deeply isolating. You start to wonder why your relationships don't feel as fulfilling as they could be, or why you feel drained after social interactions. The answer often lies in the fact that you're not showing up fully as yourself. Fear-driven niceness also robs you of your power. When you prioritize being nice over being authentic, you give other people more authority over your life than they should have. You let their comfort dictate your actions instead of standing in your own truth. And this isn't just about big, dramatic moments. It's in the little things too, biting your tongue when you have something important to say, letting someone interrupt you without speaking up, or going along with plans you don't actually enjoy because you don't want to disappoint anyone. This pattern of behavior might feel like it's protecting you from discomfort, but it's actually keeping you small. It's keeping you in a box that was never meant to hold all of who you are. The fear that drives niceness tells you that it's safer to be agreeable than to be real. But the truth is that real connection and real respect only come when you show up authentically. Being nice might get you approval, but approval isn't the same as connection. And approval certainly isn't the same as love. When you start to untangle niceness from authenticity, you begin to see the difference between being liked and being respected. Niceness often prioritizes the former at the expense of the latter. But respect, both self-respect and the respect you earn from others, comes from being honest about who you are and what you need. That's not to say you have to be harsh or unkind. Authenticity doesn't require cruelty. But it does require clarity. It requires you to let go of the need to please everyone and to focus instead on being true to yourself. Niceness and kindness are often used interchangeably, but they are fundamentally different in ways that profoundly affect how we relate to ourselves and to others. Niceness is what we've been taught to perform. It's a behavior that seeks approval, avoids conflict, and maintains harmony, often at the expense of authenticity. Kindness, on the other hand, comes from a deeper place. It's rooted in clarity, honesty, and mutual respect. It requires boundaries, while niceness often dissolves them. To understand the distinction, think about what drives each one. Niceness is often motivated by external pressures. It's about managing perceptions and trying to control how others feel. You're nice because you don't want someone to think you're rude, because you fear rejection, or because you want to maintain a specific image. Kindness, however, comes from an internal sense of integrity. It's about being considerate and compassionate without compromising your values or your needs. Niceness is reactive, kindness is intentional. Niceness frequently demands that we put others first, no matter the cost. It tells us to avoid upsetting anyone, to smooth things over, and to prioritize peace, even if that peace is superficial. When we're nice in this way, we often ignore our own feelings and needs. We say yes to things we don't want to do. We smile when we're hurt or uncomfortable. We over-apologize for things that aren't our fault. This kind of niceness might make things easier in the short term, but it comes at a significant emotional cost. Kindness, by contrast, is about connection and respect not just for others, but also for yourself. True kindness recognizes that you can't pour from an empty cup. It understands that saying no can be just as kind as saying yes. It knows that honesty, even when it's uncomfortable, is often more loving than silence or dishonesty. Kindness allows you to show up fully as yourself without feeling the need to shrink or please. It makes space for mutual respect, where both your needs and the needs of others are valued. One of the most profound differences between niceness and kindness is how they handle boundaries. Niceness often ignores boundaries entirely. It asks you to bend, accommodate, and adapt to make other people happy. If someone crosses a line, niceness tells you to stay quiet to avoid rocking the boat. Kindness, on the other hand, honors boundaries. It recognizes that saying no is not unkind. In fact, setting clear boundaries is one of the kindest things you can do for yourself and for others. Boundaries create clarity, and clarity fosters trust. Niceness also tends to prioritize comfort over growth. When you're focused on being nice, you avoid difficult conversations because they might create tension. You don't address issues directly because you don't want to make anyone uncomfortable. But kindness understands that discomfort is sometimes necessary for growth. Kindness is willing to have the hard conversations because it values honesty over ease. It's willing to risk short-term discomfort for the sake of long-term connection and respect. Another key difference lies in how niceness and kindness feel. Niceness often feels performative. It can leave you feeling drained, resentful, or disconnected because you're not being true to yourself. You're giving away parts of yourself to maintain an appearance of harmony, and that takes a toll. Kindness, however, feels genuine. It comes from a place of abundance, not obligation. When you're kind, you're acting in alignment with your values, and that alignment creates a sense of fulfillment and peace. It's also important to recognize that niceness can sometimes be a form of avoidance. When you're nice, you're often trying to avoid conflict, discomfort, or rejection. You're choosing the path of least resistance, even if it means ignoring your own needs or values. Kindness, however, requires courage. It asks you to show up fully and authentically, even when it's hard. Kindness doesn't shy away from conflict. It approaches it with empathy and a willingness to understand. Choosing kindness over niceness isn't always easy, especially in a world that often rewards people-pleasing behavior. It requires unlearning patterns that have been ingrained for years, if not decades. It asks you to confront your fears of rejection, judgment, or conflict, and to trust that your authenticity is more important than someone else's approval. But when you choose kindness, true boundary-respecting kindness, you begin to build relationships that are rooted in trust, respect, and mutual understanding. Kindness allows you to be both compassionate and honest. It lets you care for others without neglecting yourself. It creates space for authenticity where niceness often creates distance. When you prioritize kindness, you start to see that it's not just about how you treat others, it's also about how you treat yourself. True kindness is never one-sided. It values the well-being of everyone involved, including you. When you choose to be overly nice, especially at the expense of your own needs or feelings, you send an unspoken message to those around you. What I need doesn't matter as much as what you need. Over time, this behavior teaches people to devalue your needs, not necessarily because they are intentionally dismissive, but because you've conditioned them to see you as someone who will always bend, accommodate, or sacrifice. It's a cycle that begins subtly, often without you even realizing it, but it gradually chips away at your sense of self and your relationships. Niceness, when it's driven by fear or obligation, creates an uneven dynamic. When you prioritize making others comfortable over expressing your truth, you unintentionally set the expectation that your needs and boundaries are flexible or even non-existent. This might look like always saying yes when someone asks for your time, even when you're exhausted. It might look like letting someone interrupt you in conversation without addressing it, or going along with plans you don't enjoy because you don't want to disappoint anyone. These small moments might seem insignificant at first, but they add up. And over time, they reinforce the idea that your comfort is secondary to everyone else's. People take cues from how you treat yourself. If you consistently prioritize their needs over your own, they will start to expect it. Not out of malice, but because you've taught them through your actions that this is the dynamic you're willing to maintain. When you don't speak up, when you don't set boundaries, when you don't advocate for yourself, you create a pattern. And once that pattern is in place, it can be hard to break. This doesn't mean that people don't care about you or value you. It means they are operating within the framework you've established. If you always say yes, they will assume you're okay with saying yes. If you never express your discomfort, they will assume you're comfortable. And while this might keep things smooth on the surface, it often leads to frustration and resentment underneath. The danger of this cycle is that it leaves you feeling invisible and unappreciated. When you consistently prioritize others, you might start to feel like your efforts go unnoticed or unacknowledged. But the truth is, people can't value what they don't see. If you're always hiding your needs, how can anyone honor them? If you never voice your boundaries, how can anyone respect them? By being overly nice, you not only teach others to devalue your needs, you also devalue them yourself. This dynamic can also create a sense of imbalance in your relationships. When one person is always accommodating, it prevents true reciprocity from developing. Healthy relationships, whether they're friendships, romantic partnerships, or professional connections, are built on mutual respect and understanding. They require both people to show up fully and authentically. But when you're overly nice, you're not showing up as your full self. You're presenting a version of yourself that prioritizes harmony over honesty, and that prevents real connection from forming. Niceness, at its core, is often about avoiding conflict or discomfort. It feels safer to say yes than to say no. It feels easier to smile and nod than to express disagreement. But this safety is an illusion. By avoiding short-term discomfort, you set yourself up for long-term dissatisfaction. When you don't assert your needs or boundaries, you create a gap between how you feel and how you act. That gap breeds frustration, resentment, and even bitterness. It's also worth noting that being overly nice doesn't just affect you, it affects the people around you as well. When you don't express your true thoughts or feelings, you deny others the opportunity to truly know you. You might think you're being considerate by keeping the peace, but in reality, you're creating distance. Real relationships require vulnerability, and vulnerability requires honesty. When you're overly nice, you shield yourself from the discomfort of being honest, but you also shield others from the chance to truly connect with you. Breaking this cycle requires a willingness to reframe how you see yourself in your relationships. It requires recognizing that your needs are just as valid as anyone else's, and that prioritizing them doesn't make you selfish, it makes you whole. It requires understanding that setting boundaries isn't an act of rejection, it's an act of self-respect. And it requires trusting that the people who truly care about you will value and respect you, not just for your niceness, but for your authenticity. Clear communication is one of the most powerful tools we have, yet so often we avoid it in favor of being nice or agreeable. When we prioritize people-pleasing over expressing our truth, we lose the opportunity to create understanding and establish meaningful connections. The desire to be nice can lead to vague, watered-down conversations where we say what we think others want to hear instead of what we genuinely mean. But clarity, direct, honest, and compassionate communication has the power to transform relationships, foster mutual respect, and ensure that your needs and boundaries are understood and honored. When we avoid clear communication, we often do so out of fear. We fear being judged, rejected, or misunderstood. We fear making someone uncomfortable or dealing with conflict. This fear pushes us toward niceness, where we prioritize avoiding discomfort over speaking our truth. For example, instead of saying, "I can't take on this task right now," we might say something vague like, "I'll try my best," even when we know we can't deliver. This kind of communication might feel safer in the moment, but it creates confusion and sets false expectations. Niceness often leads us to speak in ways that are indirect or overly accommodating. We soften our words, dilute our intentions, and choose phrases that make us appear agreeable, even at the expense of our own clarity. But this lack of clarity can leave others guessing what we really mean or want. It places the burden on them to interpret our intentions, which can lead to misunderstandings or frustration. On the other hand, clear communication leaves no room for ambiguity. It allows others to know exactly where you stand, what you need, and what you're capable of offering. Clear communication is also essential for setting boundaries. When we rely on niceness, we often avoid establishing firm boundaries because we don't want to seem rude or unkind. But vague or unspoken boundaries aren't boundaries at all. They're opportunities for others to overstep, usually unintentionally. For instance, if you always say, "It's fine when someone repeatedly interrupts you," they'll assume you're okay with being interrupted. But if you clearly and respectfully say, "I'd like to finish my thought before we move on," you establish a boundary that's easy to understand and respect. Clarity isn't just about being direct, it's also about being authentic. When you communicate clearly, you show up as your full self, unfiltered and honest. This authenticity creates space for deeper connections because people can trust that what you're saying reflects what you truly mean. It allows for mutual understanding, where both parties can engage in a conversation that's grounded in respect and truth. Niceness, by contrast, often creates a barrier between your true self and the version of yourself you present to others. This barrier makes genuine connection nearly impossible. Another important aspect of clear communication is that it reduces resentment. When you're overly nice and avoid expressing your true feelings or needs, you often end up feeling unheard or taken for granted. This resentment can build over time, even if the other person isn't aware of it. But when you communicate clearly, you give others the chance to meet your needs or address your concerns. You stop expecting people to read your mind or pick up on subtle cues, which is both unfair to them and helpful to you. Clear communication also fosters accountability, both for yourself and for others. When you're clear about your boundaries, expectations, or intentions, you set the stage for everyone involved to take responsibility for their actions. For example, if you clearly state, "I'm not available to help with this project," you eliminate any ambiguity about your availability. This clarity ensures that others can plan accordingly and that you don't feel obligated to take on more than you can handle. There's also a certain power in saying what you mean without over-explaining or apologizing unnecessarily. Clear communication doesn't require you to justify your feelings or decisions. It simply asks you to express them honestly and respectfully. For instance, instead of saying, "I'm sorry, but I just don't think I can do that," even though I'd love to help, you can say, "I'm not able to do that right now." This kind of directness doesn't diminish your kindness, it strengthens your integrity. Clear communication requires practice and courage, especially if you've been conditioned to equate niceness with politeness or kindness. It might feel uncomfortable at first, but discomfort is often a sign of growth. Each time you choose clarity over niceness, you reinforce the belief that your voice matters, that your needs are valid, and that your authenticity is worth sharing. Through clear communication, you build stronger relationships, cultivate mutual respect, and create a life where you no longer have to sacrifice your truth for the sake of approval. Trading authenticity for approval is a pattern many people fall into, often without realizing it. From a young age, we are taught to seek approval from others, teachers, parents, friends, colleagues, as a way of navigating the world. Approval feels like validation. It feels like belonging. But when approval becomes the driving force behind our choices and behaviors, it can erode our sense of self. The cost of prioritizing approval is often our authenticity, and that trade-off can leave us feeling empty, disconnected, and unseen. Authenticity is about being true to yourself, your values, your emotions, your boundaries. It's the ability to show up as who you are without filtering or molding yourself to fit the expectations of others. Approval, on the other hand, often asks you to edit yourself. It encourages you to adapt, adjust, or even abandon parts of who you are to gain acceptance. While this may seem harmless or even necessary in certain situations, over time it can create a profound disconnect between who you are and how you present yourself to the world. When you prioritize approval over authenticity, you begin to rely on external validation as your primary source of self-worth. Your confidence becomes tied to how others perceive you rather than how you feel about yourself. This is a precarious place to be because approval is fleeting and subjective. What one person admires, another may criticize. When your sense of worth depends on meeting the expectations of others, you find yourself constantly chasing an ever-shifting target, never quite able to feel secure or whole. The pursuit of approval often leads to behaviors that are inauthentic. You might say yes to things you don't want to do because you don't want to disappoint someone. You might agree with opinions you don't actually hold to avoid conflict. You might downplay your achievements to seem more modest or pretend to be fine when you're struggling. These actions may earn you approval in the moment, but they come at the cost of your truth. Each time you prioritize approval over authenticity, you send yourself the message that who you truly are isn't enough. Over time, trading authenticity for approval can lead to feelings of emptiness or dissatisfaction. When you consistently suppress your true self to gain acceptance, you create a gap between how you feel inside and how you present yourself to the world. This gap can feel like living a double life, one where you are constantly performing, constantly trying to meet expectations that don't align with your values or desires. It's exhausting, and it leaves little room for genuine connection or fulfillment. One of the dangers of seeking approval is that it often reinforces a fear of rejection. The more you mold yourself to fit what others want, the more you fear the possibility of being rejected for who you truly are. This fear keeps you trapped in a cycle of people-pleasing where you're constantly striving to be liked or accepted, even at the expense of your own needs or boundaries. But in reality, the relationships that thrive on approval rather than authenticity are often shallow and unsustainable. True connection and respect can only exist when you are willing to show up as your authentic self. When you let go of the need for approval, you give others the opportunity to see you for who you really are. Not everyone will like you, and that's okay. Authenticity doesn't guarantee universal acceptance, but it does create the possibility for deeper, more meaningful relationships. The people who value and respect you for your authenticity are the ones who matter. Letting go of the need for approval requires courage. It means risking disapproval or rejection in favor of staying true to yourself. It means setting boundaries even when it feels uncomfortable. It means speaking your truth even when it's not what others want to hear. But this courage is what allows you to reclaim your sense of self. It's what allows you to build a life that aligns with your values and desires rather than one that is dictated by the expectations of others. The irony of seeking approval is that the more you chase it, the less fulfilled you feel. Approval is temporary and external, while authenticity is lasting and internal. When you prioritize authenticity, you don't have to rely on others to validate your worth, you know it inherently. You create a life where you are not constantly performing, but instead fully living. You stop seeking permission to be yourself and instead embrace who you are unapologetically. The idea that women should be nice is deeply embedded in societal expectations. It's a standard that shapes how women are perceived, treated, and evaluated in almost every aspect of life. Being nice is often framed as a virtue, a sign of politeness, care, and agreeability. But beneath this veneer of positivity lies a subtle, yet pervasive mechanism of control. The expectation for women to be nice isn't just about manners, it's about compliance. It's about creating a version of femininity that prioritizes the comfort of others, often at the expense of a woman's autonomy, voice, and authenticity. Niceness, as it is often demanded of women, goes beyond simple kindness or respect. It's an expectation to avoid conflict, to smooth over tension, and to maintain harmony no matter the cost. Women are taught explicitly and implicitly that their worth is tied to how likable they are. If a woman is assertive, she risks being labeled as aggressive. If she sets boundaries, she risks being seen as difficult. If she speaks her mind, she risks being dismissed as emotional or irrational. These labels are tools of enforcement used to push women back into the mold of niceness when they step outside of it. This expectation of niceness is particularly insidious because it often masquerades as a positive trait. After all, who doesn't want to be seen as kind or considerate? But the problem arises when niceness becomes a weapon used to police women's behavior. It creates an impossible standard, one where women must prioritize everyone else's needs while downplaying their own. This standard doesn't just limit women's choices, it limits their ability to be fully human. Humans aren't always agreeable or accommodating, and that's okay. But when women are punished for stepping outside the bounds of niceness, they are effectively denied the freedom to exist as their authentic selves. The pressure to be nice also perpetuates inequality in ways that are both subtle and overt. In professional settings, for example, women are often expected to take on emotional labor, soothing egos, mediating conflicts, or providing support tasks that are rarely acknowledged or rewarded. When women do speak up, they are frequently held to a different standard than men. A man who is direct is seen as confident, while a woman who is equally direct is often seen as abrasive. These double standards reinforce the idea that a woman's primary role is to maintain harmony, not to challenge the status quo. The expectation of niceness extends to personal relationships as well. Women are often conditioned to prioritize the emotional well-being of others, even at their own expense. This might mean saying yes to things they don't want to do, staying silent when they're upset, or avoiding difficult conversations to keep the peace. While these behaviors might seem minor in isolation, over time they erode a woman's sense of self. They teach her that her needs, feelings, and boundaries are less important than the comfort of others. Breaking free from the expectation to be nice requires a willingness to challenge deeply ingrained norms. It means recognizing that niceness, as it is often demanded of women, is not the same as kindness. Kindness comes from a place of strength and authenticity, while niceness often stems from fear of rejection, judgment, or conflict. Choosing not to be nice doesn't mean being cruel or dismissive. It means being honest, assertive, and true to yourself, even when it's uncomfortable. When women reject the expectation to be nice, they create space for authenticity and growth. They show others that it's possible to set boundaries without losing respect, to speak their truth without losing connection, and to prioritize their own needs without losing their sense of compassion. This shift not only benefits women individually, but also challenges the broader societal norms that perpetuate inequality. When women refuse to shrink themselves to fit the mold of niceness, they make it easier for others to do the same. The expectation for women to be nice is not just a personal issue, it's a cultural one. It shapes how women are viewed in politics, media, workplaces, and communities. It influences the opportunities they are given, the respect they receive, and the power they are allowed to hold. By rejecting this expectation, women can begin to redefine what it means to be strong, compassionate, and authentic. They can begin to create a world where their worth is not tied to their ability to make others comfortable, but to their ability to be unapologetically themselves. The time has come to unshackle ourselves from the expectation to be nice at the expense of our authenticity, boundaries, and worth. Being nice, when rooted in fear or obligation, serves no one. It stifles our voices, diminishes our power, and perpetuates inequality. True connection, respect, and growth are built on clarity, courage, and authenticity. When we choose to honor our needs, speak our truths, and reject the confines of niceness, we not only reclaim our own power, but also create a ripple effect that challenges societal norms and redefines strength. The world doesn't need women who are merely nice, it needs women who are bold, unapologetic, and fully themselves.